Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
So, all right, this is kind of a monumentous day for our little Parenting Horizons podcast because we have a first ever guest for our podcast. So it's myself and Julie. And Julie, do you want to do the honor of introducing our guest?
Sure. Our guest today is Emilie Vogas. And Emilie is a specialist in autism and other neurodivergent kiddos. And Emilie, I think I should really let you introduce yourself. You have your own company, right?
Yes, I do. So I'm based out of Central Texas, but I have a small private practice called Real Life ABA, and we primarily work with neurodivergent kids and their parents. A lot of what we do is educating parents and getting that buy-in because...
Can I ask you, so I already have a question. When you say neurodivergent, what does that mean?
Yeah, so neurodivergent is a broad term that really looks at or refers to kids who fall outside of the middle average 50%. And that's not to say that the middle 50% is average in general, but what we're talking about is often kids with diagnoses, autism, Down syndrome. There's some neurodivergency that happens in cerebral palsy and diagnoses like that. But these are kids who typically fall outside of that bell curve 50%.
What we might consider, quote unquote, normal.
Yes. And what we usually refer to as neurotypical.
Yes.
And do you specialize in something specific then at your practice, or do you see kids across the spectrum?
I see kids, and spectrum usually refers to,
yes.
in my line of work, does refer to the autism spectrum.
Right.
And so, yes, usually that I have my master's in autism and developmental disabilities. So I primarily focus on kids on the autism spectrum, but I see kids with Down syndrome. I see kids with sensory processing issues. I see kids with obsessive compulsive disorder. So I see a fairly broad range of individuals in my practice, but my specialty, I guess, would be autism and the autism spectrum.
And has that gotten, I don't have a child with autism. I don't know any of my friends don't have children. So I guess my question would be, has it gotten more, like the diagnosis has gotten more specific? Because it seems autism seems kind of broad, right, in terms of saying that a kid has autism. And as we've gotten more, sort of knowledge and research, we've been able to diagnose kids more specifically, I would think. But I guess the point is autism a word that can cover a wide range of diagnoses? Like, does CP, does OCD, is that considered like a mild form of autism? Are you on the spectrum or no?
I mean, in my opinion, everybody is kind of somewhere on the spectrum, right? So
right.
The spectrum really has a lot of a very wide range of attributes and what some people call severities. So, we have kids who pass, for lack of a better word, as neurotypical. You would really never know other than the fact that somewhere in their charts they have an autism diagnosis. And then we have kids who really need a pretty significant amount of assistance to live out their daily lives. They really have had to be taught how to engage in self-care, brushing teeth and showering and toileting, and all of that has required some more significant intervention to have them acquire those skills. So you have this huge broad range. And we all have, when I say that we all have, that everybody's kind of on the spectrum, what I mean by that is that we all have bits and pieces that
Sure.
kind of fit into that spectrum, we would never qualify for a
Yeah, of
diagnosis,
course.
because you do have to
Right,
have a
right.
specific set of, you have to meet a certain set of criteria to
Well,
to have the diagnosis of autism. But we all have little bits and pieces that kind of fall into that spectrum somewhere, which I think allows those of us who are quote unquote neurotypical to kind of have a better understanding of what these kids go through, because
right.
we have those qualities in ourselves.
My question would be, we can talk about if you have a child that falls under that category, and we can talk about some strategies with dealing with that child. But my question would be, what do you do if you're a parent? And, what are some of those qualities, criteria that you might start to see in your own child? Like, what tips off a parent? I mean, I guess sometimes it can be obvious, like if the child isn't verbal or there's something really specific. Like, how do parents come to you? What do parents do in that moment when they're like, something is not, typical? What does a parent do?
I was just going to say that I think that what happens often is that Julie may see people who have small, parents who have very small children, and something's not right. And they actually may see Julie before they would see me, because I'm not a diagnostician. So I usually see kiddos after the fact, after they've been diagnosed. I mean, what I tell all of my parents and friends and colleagues and all that stuff is that if somebody has a suspicion that something feels off, they should absolutely always be referred. I mean, they should always go to their pediatrician and say, something doesn't sit right here. Something is going on, and I think we need, further evaluation.
And Julie, is that I'm sorry, Julie, and is that what you would do? Like, if in your group, or if you're in individual counseling with someone and they're bringing this up to you, is that what you do? Do you refer to a pediatrician first, for that pediatrician then to steer them towards an expert?
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. And what I look for when a parent is talking to me, I'm not a diagnostician either, but if I hear a parent describing behaviors that are off of the developmental norm, what I would say, what a typically developing child is. So maybe they're walking late, maybe they're doing what we call a W sit, which means that, yeah, right. Well, it would kill our knees to do it, but it's sitting on your bottom with your thighs together, but the bottoms of your legs out to the sides. And back. So it looks like a W. And typically that's a symptom of having a weak core. I've seen kids, or I've heard about kids from the parents that I work with, who can't really stand up for very long. They fall down. Kids who engage in what we call stimming behaviors. So they might repeatedly hit themselves in the head. They might flap their hands in front of their eyes. They might tap their feet. I mean, Emilie can describe these even better. But what I look for, and when I refer a parent out, and also language delays, is when I see a parent who has a 18-month-old, a 24-month-old. The point is, and I think a point that Emilie was making is that if you suspect that your child isn't developing along typical lines, whether you come to somebody like me because, you're having more challenges than, your peers raising your kid, or whether your pediatrician notices it first, early intervention is really important.
And why
early
is that?
Intervention is super key.
But
Emilie,
why?
Why is that?
Why is it? I mean, I maybe it's obvious, but why? Why get in there just so you can start sort of dealing with that behavior early on and start of getting them the help they need, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at early intervention, and there's been a bunch of studies about this, what happens in early intervention is that all of those maladaptive behaviors that are not socially acceptable, are very quick to become intrinsic to anybody, but particularly small children. They are sponges, they're soaking up a lot of stuff. And so if they do a behavior over and over again for a little bit of time, that becomes a habit. And that's exactly how they kind of want to stay. And then you have that kind of inertia issue that they're like, this is my pattern and I really like it. And I'm really
and it's
not going to
comforting
move.
too.
Yeah.
Right.
And
right.
so if you have early intervention, you can kind of get in before those patterns and routines get hyper established, and you can start to help those kids develop behaviors that are going to be socially acceptable and socially function, in the wider world. As
And can you
age.
mention what you said to me before, sort of off mic when we were talking? How did you describe those behaviors that you say that we all have a little flavor of it, whether it's the clicking of the pen or the twirling of the hair? How did you define that? What did you call it?
Right. So what Julie referred to as stimming is the official name for it in the industry is stereotypy. So that is the really classic one that kind of gets portrayed a lot in media, is the flapping of the hands in front of the face. And that's sensory input that they're kind of seeking out. So that's not seen as socially acceptable. What we see a lot in the neurotypical population is also stereotypy, but it's just more socially acceptable than the hand flapping. So you'll see people click pens, you'll see people twirl hair, you'll see people fidget with necklaces or jewelry. That all is 100% under the umbrella of stereotypy, but it's socially acceptable. So often what we're doing when I work with a kid is trying to find those stereotypies that they're already engaging in and find something that's more socially acceptable, simply because it's going to make their lives easier and make it more plausible for them to be able to go out and interact with people without ridicule or any of the myriad number of things that can happen. So stereotypy is one of those categories that everybody engages in. I mean, I don't know very many people who don't.
So, I mean, Emilie used the example of, hand flapping in front of eyes. I think there's a movement, and I think we should probably just address this right up front. There's a movement in the autistic community that would say that some of those behaviors, like hand flapping, are socially acceptable. It's just that the parents don't like them and they want the child to change. So I think, that's arguable, right? But I think one of the reasons that I am an advocate for children on the spectrum who have a lot of these stimming behaviors, I'm an advocate for therapy for them, because some of them are not neutral behaviors. Some of them involve self-harm, some of them involve banging their heads on the floor, some of them involve playing with their own feces, and that all may feel good to them. It may serve that purpose. And Emilie, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that obviously those are behaviors that are not only not socially acceptable, but that are harmful to their surroundings or harmful to themselves. Would that be accurate, Emilie?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, I mean, we primarily the behaviors that I'm working with often are those behaviors that are detrimental to themselves or others, and in really significant ways. I have kids who bang their heads against walls, who scratch themselves, and it is heartbreaking when that happens, and for both the kid and the parents. It's just a really hard situation.
So we should talk about like what you want to do in those situations, but I guess as I'm listening to both of you talk, it seems like there's a social emotional component to this, in the sense that how do you determine if the behavior, what is considered unacceptable? And I think, Julie, you just sort of touched on that in terms of how do we change the narrative, and does it become about, for you, Emilie, maybe in your practice, is the child bothered by it? I mean, obviously, if there's like self-harm going on and he's totally disruptive, it's one thing. But do you find it can be a fine line between, if someone's flapping their hands in front of their face, I mean, is that, if it doesn't cause them discomfort, if it's actually a self-soothing thing, how do you determine like, oh, we need to change this behavior? Like if it's coming from the parents or the school, like, do you run into that situation too? Where is the line? Because obviously there's real extreme that's obvious, like, okay, we have to deal with this. Do you run into that?
Yeah, I mean, we run into it a tremendous amount. I have so many times I run into parents, particularly when the kid with the diagnosis is the older of, several children, or they're only, where they go, oh, I want to get rid of that behavior. And I'm like, okay, so we really need to look at what developmentally is appropriate here, because, the kid gets excited and shrieks. I'm not so down with, that's not a behavior that I'm going to be concerned about, because I get excited, I get loud, I get that's that I'm not, that's just not something that I'm willing to work with. And in some of those cases, then I refer out. But what we have to look at is, it's so hard. You have to look at the physical well-being.
Yeah.
So all of the head banging, all that stuff is really, really challenging. What I find is that often I have kids who are a little bit older who, if they have engaged in hand flapping, which is not harmful to anybody, if it feels good, that's something that can absolutely be left in place. We do start to run into teasing and bullying at the school age. And so then we have to walk that fine line of, okay, well, and oftentimes I can go to the kid and kind of go, okay, there's some choices here. If you want to continue to do this and this feels good, then absolutely go for it. And let's try to figure out some way to figure out the bullying situation, because kids are mean sometimes.
Well, then are you coordinating care almost with the school? I would imagine then it becomes a thing where, so let's say a situation, it's hand flapping or it's sort of specific behavior that he's getting teased about. Gosh, this seems so complicated to me, because I imagine it depends on the individual, that if the child is able to articulate, this bothers me, I'm getting teased, can you help me change this? Then are you saying to the parents hey, he's getting bullied every day at school, we need to bring a counselor in and make them aware that this situation is happening? Is that part of your process as well?
Yeah. So when a kid is able to kind of articulate that, and even when the kid is not able to articulate that, we really do try to work as a team. So we bring in school, we bring in other therapists, speech therapists, physical therapists, occupational therapists, and it really is a team effort. We're all trying to help the child ultimately. And unfortunately, sometimes that gets a little bit adversarial. Particularly
of course,
with,
depending on points of view and stuff.
And that can be really, really challenging in its own right. But when there's a bullying situation, we definitely do talk to the teacher, and sometimes the teacher will bring it to us and go, look, this is what's happening. And so the teacher will be more concerned about that kind of stereotypy than we will at home, because it's not a big deal in our realm. But at school, it's really a huge issue. And so we kind of then have to work with the school to try to figure out either a way to educate the kids and explain to them what's going on. Knowledge is power in a lot of cases. And so educating the kids about how they can interact with the individual in question, or the individual with the diagnosis, that kind of is usually the route that we wind up going with for that kind of situation.
Emilie, maybe you could describe a little bit about how you help kids change that behavior, whether it's a self-harm behavior, right? Because I feel like there's an intersection here between, I work with parents and give them the tools to use in the household to change a behavior that's inappropriate. And I think that there's an intersectionality around kind of this idea that all behavior is communication, right? So maybe thinking about, what is this child trying to communicate, or why is this child trying to self-soothe in the case of neurodivergent kids, and then how do you kind of steer that into a more appropriate direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the time, you were 100% right. Behavior is communication, and that's what I founded my business on, is that ultimately that's what we're looking for, is to try to figure out what the individual is trying to communicate and figure out if we can do it in an easier way or do it in a less harmful way in the cases of self-injurious behavior or any of that. So a lot of the time we do what I call narration. So you're engaging with a kid, and I do say kid primarily because that is the age group that I work with. We absolutely have adults with autism and have colleagues who work with that population. But a lot of the time, I mean, that's just not my specialty. My specialty is really the early intervention through middle school age kids.
I guess that my question would be then, and then how does it manifest in terms of what you're doing with the child? So let's say a child has a behavior that's going on in school that you need to change. And I imagine, so there's practical things that you teach, but also are you doing the emotional component as well in terms of their emotional struggle?
Yeah, so I do. I think that there is kind of a push in the industry to do more of that. And there's a lot of old school thinking that is kind of slowly, hopefully, being phased out in terms of not paying attention to that emotional component and kind of ignoring it because it's not pure behavior. But we all know that there's a really strong tie between emotional well-being and behavioral well-being. And so denying that component of it is not ultimately going to solve anything, because if you just completely ignore it, there's no working through it. So
no, I was just going to say, so if someone, like if the behavior says, let's say it's them flapping their hands, right? And they want to try to change that or end it. Like, how do you deal with something like that?
So often what we do is kind of narrate the situation. So we try to figure out why that's happening. Now, sometimes it just happens because it feels good. And so in that case, I will often talk about it with the kid. Okay, so I want you to be aware of what your body is doing right now. And I see that you're flapping. What can we think of that might be something that you could do instead with your body that would make it feel good and avoid the interactions that you've been having at school, or avoid being teased, or however you're going to communicate that situation to the child. In other cases, it is anxiety, and it's pretty clear that that's what's going on. And we can kind of intervene and see, do they start to do it when I've asked them to do their homework? Or do they start to do it when I've asked them to go perform a chore, putting away dishes or taking out the trash, or any of those situations? That would start to give me a clue that it's because they're anxious or they don't want to do something. Or are they doing it when I'm on talking to mom or dad, and all of a sudden in the background they crop up and do it? Maybe they want my attention. So I would kind of try to figure out where it happens the most.
The trigger is.
Yeah,
right.
What that trigger is, and then work through it with them. So I see you're feeling really anxious, that I've asked you to do your homework. Can we think of something that might work to alleviate that anxiety and still get your homework done? Stuff sometimes just still has to get done. I'm anxious sometimes when I have to go run errands or talk on the phone, and it still has to get done. So I have to figure out coping mechanisms that I can put in place for myself to make that anxiety less, so that I can do those tasks. So that's what I'm strategizing with the child about. What can we think of that we might be able to do, or we might be able to change, that can help you feel less anxious in this situation. Or in the case of, the kid, I'm talking to mom and dad, and the kid goes off and engages in whatever behavior they're going to engage in. I see you want my attention. Let me finish with mom, or, give me 1 minute, and then I'll come back to you, and you can have all my attention for X number of minutes. So that I'm communicating with them pretty much constantly and giving that information back to them, rather than just kind of keeping them in the dark. And that allows them to change those behaviors over time, because they either know what's coming up, or they know that they have an alternative behavior to engage in to make themselves feel better, or alleviate whatever is kind of driving that behavior in the first place.
And are you dealing then mostly with kids that have behaviors, but they're in like a public school? Right? So they have the ability, because it sounds like as I'm listening to you, these are kids that have these behaviors, but have the capacity to articulate their thoughts and feelings. So maybe their intelligence is on level, but they have these behaviors that they're having to deal with. Is that a lot of who you're dealing with, as opposed to someone where it's so severe, they might not even be able to go to a public school?
So I work, my kids run the gamut, from kids who really can articulate, yes, I'm feeling nervous. Yes, I'm feeling worried. Yes, I'm feeling sad, to my kiddos who really don't have the language and may never have the language to identify it with words, what they're feeling. But that doesn't mean that they don't identify those feelings without words.
Right.
Words are 8% of
7%
communication?
of
7%. Oh, I was so close.
7%?
7.
They are 7%
Wow.
of communication.
Wow.
So
Right.
you can tell a lot by interacting with a kid and, looking at their body language. Even if they don't talk, use words, they may verbalize in other ways that give you that information as to how they're feeling, what's going on with them. And you can kind of probe those, if I've given them something that they need to get done, if I've told them that they need to go brush their teeth, or they need to pick up the toys on the way up the stairs so that everybody doesn't fall over them, and that's where the behavior occurs, then that gives me a clue as to what they're trying to communicate. They don't really want to do those tasks, which I get. Or, again, parent interaction is often a really good one, that attention, that they want my attention versus my attention being on mom or dad. But just because they're not verbal doesn't mean that they can't communicate those emotions to me, and that emotional well-being.
Yeah, they do communicate with, and I think we've said this on the podcast before, Greg, but words are 7% of communication. Body language is 55% of communication. Tone of voice is 38. So if you've got a child who is nonverbal in terms of words, and they are behaving in a certain way and screeching, you've still got, 93% of the communication going on, because you can watch their body and hear their tone. And even if they're just behaving, I think it's important for parents of both neurodivergent and neurotypical kids to understand that they're always communicating. Always, 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 from birth. They communicate with us, when, of course, they don't have words. So, part of what I do, and I think what Emilie also does, Emilie does it between therapist and kid, but also educates the parents. And correct me if I'm wrong, Emilie, but we try to help parents decode their children's behaviors and interpret the behaviors, and then validate the feeling that is underlying the behavior, so that the child learns to behave in appropriate ways to talk about or to convey what their feelings are. Would you say that's accurate, Emilie, in the neurodivergent field as well?
Yeah, I would. And I think that, not necessarily, and we talk about behavior and replacement behaviors, what we're attempting to do is to give them either the vocabulary or the ability to kind of show you in some way what's going on internally. So that may not be words, like we said, but it may be either sign, or, they know that if they're feeling overwhelmed, they can go to a safe place, a safe corner or a quiet corner, and have that time away from everybody to calm their bodies back down, to kind of recenter, whatever they need to do. But we're teaching that kind of interaction. If they feel overwhelmed, if they feel upset, they can remove their bodies from the situation, rather than insisting that they continue to engage in a situation that they're not okay with.
So as I'm listening to, it sounds like to me, so you have to pinpoint maybe what the behaviors are that are, I guess, detrimental. Then you're helping the child. You're giving them strategies. Then is that what you would say? You're giving them strategies on working with the child on how to deal when those moments come up. Is that the idea?
Yeah. So usually, I stop the situation in the moment. I say, oh, it looks like you're feeling X. Let's do Y, right? So I see that you're feeling really angry that your sister grabbed the toy. Let's tell her that you would like a turn, or tell her that it's still your turn. Or I see that you're feeling really sad right now because you fell down. Let's come get a hug. Or let's come show mom the ouchie.
Right.
So that you're always you're giving that opportunity to replace the behavior that you might see and that you might be concerning in whatever way with a behavior that is functional.
But I imagine it, depending on the age of the child, it sounds like you're potentially giving those strategies to the parent, right? I mean, like if the child is 15 and you're saying, okay, hey, right, I would imagine you're working with them individually more like, okay, when this comes up, you're dealing with this. Because the things you just described, it sounded like you were almost a parent talking to your child. So if you pinpoint, like, is that how it happens? Like a parent might say, yeah, when I ask him to do his homework, he hits himself in the head. So you have that knowledge, and then you're talking to the child, but then do you go back to the parent and say, hey, this is whatever the child's name is, this is what we're working on. This is what I think maybe you could implement in the home to help?
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
Absolutely. Because I'm there, however many hours I'm there a week. Some kids I see 10, 15 hours a week. Some kids I see 1 or 2 hours a week.
Oh, wow.
So
do you go to their home, or
Yeah.
are you in your office?
Yeah. Most of the time pandemic changed all the things.
Oh, right. Sure.
But yes, pre-pandemic, yes, I went into homes with the full understanding that I was there a small fraction of the time that parents are going to be there or caregivers are going to be there.
Right.
So
right.
I can do all the magnificent, amazing things in the world, and I can get the kid to communicate with me. But if they don't then turn around and communicate with the caregiver, then I haven't done my job, because all of the time that they're with their caregiver and not communicating with their caregiver and creating just a fraught relationship with that caregiver then undoes anything that I could possibly try to implement, the couple hours I'm there. So I'm always trying to give the parent the strategy to alleviate the behavior and to communicate with their kid. That's ultimately what we're working towards, is having a parent who's not like, my child is smacking their sister every time something happens, to a parent who goes, okay, I see what is happening here. I see the constituent parts that are coming together to create this behavior, and here's what we're going to do about it. And creating an environment where the parent can really feel safe to kind of slow down and to really examine what's going on. Because I think a lot of the time, particularly with parents of neurodivergent kids, and possibly with all neurotypical kids as well, I don't know, parents rush headlong into situations and go, I have to fix this right now, and it has to be yesterday, and it has to be fixed, and it has to be perfect.
Right.
And I mean, they just
and it just can't work that way.
And it's not going to work that way. And it creates a situation in which the child is stressed out and the parent is stressed out, and everybody just comes to this, volcano of a situation, and it rarely ends well. So
that sounds like that's a key for parents to hear, that this idea, it's kind of, you want to play the long game, I guess. Like the idea is like, we're going to shift this. It's like moving an iceberg, though. We got to take our time. This is not going to happen overnight. I mean, that's true of any behavior. It's difficult to overnight.
Right, exactly. Right, and as we've said before on the podcast, and I will continue to say to my dying breath, unless it's dangerous, underreact. Because look, if a kid has a knife in their hand, that's dangerous. A kid, is about ready to drink a quart of bleach or even a tablespoon of bleach, that's dangerous. Right? You have to act immediately. And if a kid is hitting their sister, I would also say, that's dangerous. You got to stop the behavior. But if a kid is not listening, if a kid is bouncing on the bed, if the kid, most situations really don't qualify as dangerous, really don't necessitate that trigger response on the part of the parents. And underreaction, what that gives the parents a chance to do is to kind of think about what's going on, to think like a therapist. I think it's funny that you said that Emilie sounded like she was almost a parent talking to her own kid. Well, the reality is all the skills that I teach parents and all the skills Emilie teaches parents are therapeutic skills. I mean, it's good practices are good practices. It doesn't matter whether they're in a therapy room or whether they're in a house between parent and child. Mm-hmm. So, so it gives parents, that underreaction gives parents a chance to do kind of what a therapist would do, which is analyze the behavior, Where is it coming from? What is the child likely feeling in this case? How can I get them to express that feeling differently so I can be more supportive or helpful? How can I give them the language that they need? Or, Emilie works with, some kids who are nonverbal. How can I give them a different behavior that's going to communicate what that feeling is so that the adults can help? Would you say that's accurate, Emilie?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And allowing them the opportunity to communicate in an easier way. I mean, I think as adults, our job is to facilitate that communication, and whether it's a neurotypical kid who just doesn't have the language yet, right? Like
Right.
that Julie talked about infants. They don't have the language, so we have to continue to model that as they get older, so that they have that clue in language. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling whatever. So whether it's that kind of a communicative experience or relationship, or our kids on the spectrum who don't necessarily or may not develop that ability, but who can, they feel angry, they walk away. They feel angry, they take a couple deep breaths. They feel angry, whatever that skill is that we've taught them, they don't have the language to say, I'm feeling angry, but they do have the ability to know what that feels like in their bodies and perform an action that is ultimately going to tell us, oh, they're feeling angry.
This is where they're at. But how do you do it with the child? I mean, Julie just said nonverbal. So if you work with kids that are nonverbal, wow, how does that work that you're able to give them strategies or coping skills? Is it because they're able to articulate? Well, Julie said words are only 7%. So they're able to communicate to you in another way, their struggle? Like, how do you even figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at the contextual clues, just like you would in any situation. You're looking at that antecedent, what happens immediately before the behavior. And you're looking at the consequences, what happens in their surroundings immediately after the behavior. And combined with that information and the information that they're giving you in the moment, you can kind of piece together what's going on. It could be variations on a theme, right? Sibling steals the toy. What are some feelings that they could feel? They could feel angry.
Right.
They could feel jealous. They could feel disappointed. So, there's a couple options there. That's true. But the likelihood is that we're going to respond to all of those in a similar-ish, very generic, but similar-ish way. And we can teach that replacement behavior across the board there. So yeah, we're pulling in, and oftentimes what happens with parents is that that's a lot of information to try to gather in the moment that your child is, tossing something across the room at their sibling. So what we talked about earlier about kind of slowing down and having those moments to collect and kind of really analyze the situation like a therapist, that's often what I'm teaching parents to do, which is to kind of back up, take a moment, try to get all of the information that they can get. Because, again, using a sibling as an example, kid blows up and they're right next to their sibling. Maybe sibling hit them. There's all sorts of situations. So sometimes we're missing those clues, and we, as a society, unfortunately, I think we have instilled in a lot of our parents that it's often the neurodivergent kid's fault. And that's not true. That's not the way that this works, right? We all make mistakes. Stuff happens across the board regardless of neurodivergency. So sometimes it's the other kid's fault, the adult's fault. I've had situations where kid is really struggling and I go into the school and find that teacher is flat out ignoring the child or punishing the kid for something that the kid didn't do. The adult is at fault at that point. So we have to figure out ways to do that. But often what happens is that the blame gets placed on the neurodivergent kid.
Right. And then you're sort of stuck in that shame cycle too, that they're always getting in trouble. It sounds like you really have to be, a couple things occur to me. It sounds like you really have to be a detective to sort of like start to piece this together. The other thing I think about is Julie and I talk about a lot, and Julie mentions all the time, is that this stuff takes time. especially in something as complicated and nuanced as this, different from child to child, not only for you, but for the parent. And the idea being, when Julie talks about the techniques on the episodes we do, I always say, like, this is not a magic panacea. You're not going to get it right the first time. So it seems like in this case, that's even more true. Would you say?
Yeah, it absolutely takes practice. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. I've been doing this for a decade, over a decade, and it's fairly second nature, but it wasn't when I started. And I think that when you add in the fact that, like, parents, I mean, I have a 1.5-year-old. When he does stuff, all of those techniques that I have, down pat and are fantastic. I mean, and as far as we know right now, he's neurotypical.
Right.
But all of those fantastic techniques that I have really honed over the last decade go flying out the window. And it's really, really hard to go, okay, no, wait, I have to step back. What is he trying to communicate? Right. He runs into the room and goes, ah! And I'm like, what do you want, kid? What is going on? Well, I was talking to grandparents. So yeah, that's frustrating. And he doesn't have the language to say, Mom, I want your attention, please. He's 1.5.
Right.
So, it's really, I try to remind my parents that I work with, it's really easy for me to come in and say, this is what you need to do, and you need to communicate with your child in such and such a way, and give them the language and the strategies to communicate more fully, more easily with you. And when your heart is kind of outside of your body in that way, and like a piece of you is standing there in the kitchen screaming at you, it's a lot harder to take that step back. So slowly and over time, it happens, but it's not an easy, quick fix at all.
I think also in any family setting, what we're talking about is habits, right? That can instill these dances that we do with one another. Parents do on an adult level, children do on a sibling level, parents and children do together. And it's hard to break out of the dance because it's the status quo and it's what everybody's comfortable with, even if it's awful. There's still a comfort. It's what I know versus what I don't know. So it really takes, I think, a lot of patience and persistence and forgiveness of themselves on the part of parents, so that you say, all right, wow, I blew it yesterday. And Emilie, Greg and I have talked about what I call my 70-30 rule, which is you only have to get it right 70% of the time. There's a 30% margin for error. And I think it's so important to allow yourself to forgive yourself for that 30%, because it's going to happen. It's not easy to break out of these patterns.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Emilie.
I was going to say also that, I often talk to parents that I work with about picking your battles, particularly with neurodivergent kids. It can feel like everything is hitting the fan all at once. So, you want the kids to sit at the dinner table for, with the rest of the family for dinner, and you want them to use a fork, and you want them to use a napkin, and you want them. So in that situation, maybe pick your battle. Choose that you just want them to sit at the table. It doesn't matter whether or not they're, using their hands or using a fork. It doesn't matter if they're using their shirt to wipe their mouth. All you want to do in this moment is to have them be with the family. And that that's true in like kind of a microcosm of one experience in a day, and it can be true in the macrocosm of a full day. You have had 3 blow-ups because you wouldn't let the kid have ice cream and whatever, and you're working on this one particular behavior, or you're about to work on this one particular behavior at the end of the night, like, getting them to brush their teeth. It's okay to let the brushing the teeth go for a couple more days, and choose not to have that be the be all and end all.
The hill to die on.
The hill to die on, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And
well, that seems important. I mean, our hour has gone really fast, so I do want to end with a couple of things. The first thing is to say, can you speak to a little bit about why the I mean, the pandemic has been challenging for everyone. Maybe why the pandemic is specifically challenging to neurodivergent kids. And also, are there some things that parents should keep in mind as we're coming out of the pandemic, hopefully?
Hopefully.
Hopefully. That's kind of how I feel currently.
Please, can we come out of it?
I don't know.
I'm just going to cry gently for a second. Okay,
exactly.
go ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that the pandemic was incredibly hard because everybody really, but in particularly neurodivergent kids thrive on routine. And we completely had to disregard routines for a year and a half.
And that's because it's so comforting to them, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, that's the thing. They have things that they do that just comfort them.
Right.
That got thrown out the window.
Right, exactly. I mean, and we all have that, right? Like I like to get up and I go get my coffee and I feed my son. So I have my little routine, which is, very comforting to me. And I have the ability to say, if my routine gets thrown off, geez, that really was miserable. I really didn't like that my routine was disrupted. When you're then dealing with a kid who doesn't have the language to tell you that, it's that much harder because they can't necessarily come and say, hey, my routine got disrupted for a year and a half and it really was awful and I need some extra space or I need some extra closeness or whatever it is. So that in and of itself was very challenging. And then we're adding on to that the fact that if the kids were, certain places in the country, like here in Texas, did have in-person schooling, but all the children were required to wear masks. And you're talking about a kid who has sensory processing issues or, both physically that a mask had to be on them, the majority of the year. And then you've taken a teacher who no longer has, you're no longer giving that visual cue of speaking because you've put a mask in front of the teacher. So, we've thrown a lot at these kids and we've thrown a lot at every child on this planet really this past year. And they're resilient and they'll get through it. And it was really hard. So, the pandemic was really, really challenging. And as we come out of it, a lot of the behaviors that they were used to practicing may have been completely disrupted, social interactions or going to school, the transition from home to school or to bus to school or whatever that those transitions looked like. All of those were gone for a year. And so now we're coming back and expecting children to pop right back into, I can make these transitions really easily and I can interact with people again really easily. And these are all things that have been difficult for neurotypical kids, for neurotypical adults. And we're asking children to do them and to not complain and to not react really in any way. And it's really, really hard. And so what I've told my parent, I've had lots of parents come to me and go, my kid is so nervous about camp because, they're going to interact with friends and they're worried that they're not going to make friends and blah, blah. And I go, okay, that's okay. It's okay to feel nervous. It's okay to feel worried. Yeah. Our goal is to not to get rid of those feelings. Our role as adults in this situation, whether we're caregivers or parents or therapists, is to hold the space for those feelings and give them permission to feel them. Because if they can accurately and easily express those feelings with us, they're less likely to go out and smack, a new friend, because they're not sure how to interact or they want to make a connection. And so they hit a friend because that's what they're actually wanting is to make that friendship, but they don't know how to do it. And we haven't given them the safe space to feel those feelings at home. And so that's kind of squirting out sideways, as we say. So really giving them the opportunity to feel nervous, to feel worried, to feel anxious about all of these transitions coming back online. And again, accepting the fact that it's going to take time. That, we'd say that neurotypical, Julie has said this before, I know, that neurotypical kids take 6 to 8 weeks to transition to something new. So
Wow.
whether that be school or whether that be a new routine or whether that be a new family member or whatever, 6 to 8 weeks of transition. We look at our neurodivergent kids.
At
and
least.
At least. True. Yes. At least 6 to 8 weeks
Wow.
of transition.
Yeah, so if it's 2 months for neurotypical, I imagine like we have to give even more flexibility for neurodivergent.
100%. Yeah. And that's okay. It's going to take time.
So I kind of always do this to Julie as well, but I want to sort of, wrap up by sort of encapsulating some of the things we've talked about. So if you have a parent that either is already with you, or let's say a parent that's starting to experiencing some of these behaviors with their child, what are some of the, and they're trying to figure out what to do, what are some of the main things that parents should keep in mind? I mean, the couple that already I'm remembering now is to be patient, that this is a longer process, but what are some of the things you would like parents to think about when they're dealing with a child that has these neurodivergent behaviors?
I mean, I think that what we hope is for a parent or caregiver to be able to really take a step back and look at the whole situation, particularly what their child is communicating. And if you can kind of put the goggles of those words, that verbal behavior, the actual act of speaking is only 7% of communication. If you can put those kind of goggles on, it's going to open your world, because you're going to be able to see all the things that are being communicated to you in every moment of every day with your child. And that is going to open up both teaching opportunities, but just relationship opportunities with your kid that you didn't even know existed.
Now, Julie, I see you nodding a lot. Do you want to add in there? You're smiling and nodding, so she's hitting your main favorite points, I think.
Oh, 100%. I think she articulated it very well. I think that when we stop, as Emilie said, when we stop focusing on the words and really focus on what the child is communicating, words or no words, that focus on what is this child trying to tell me, or what is this teenager trying to tell me, or what is this young adult trying to tell me. When we focus on that, we really open that door to communication. We open the ability for a relationship to grow and strengthen in that process. I think we just put too much importance on words.
Right. Well, and success too, like getting it and figuring it out and stopping the behavior. What are some of the pragmatic things? I mean, you've already sort of touched on them, like a parent that's at home and is like, there's something off here. There's something that's not making sense to me. Like, what does a parent do, and what can they expect to do? Do they go to their pediatrician? Do you see kids that stay with you for years and years? Like, what does a parent do?
Yeah, I mean, pediatrician to me is always the first stop. Partly because most of us in the autism community, anybody worth their salt, should not do anything prior to a medical release, right? Because again, we're talking about kids who may not have the ability to say, hey, my head hurts, or my tummy hurts, or my arm hurts, or whatever. So first, even if there is a diagnosis, they should get checked out by their pediatrician.
You're saying like they should rule out that it's not a medical thing.
Yeah.
That's the first step.
Yeah. I've actually had clients with pretty significant medical issues that have gone undiagnosed until I said, I'm not comfortable acting like this as a behavior until you get a clearance from a pediatrician. And the pediatrician has come back and gone, oh my, and something has cropped up. So that first and foremost, the trip to the pediatrician is always first in my book. And hopefully you have a relationship with your pediatrician that allows them to hear your concerns. Because some pediatricians, unfortunately, kind of have a tendency to kind of brush through.
Be dismissive.
Yeah, be dismissive about first-time parent concerns, or you don't really have a good grasp on what this child should look like. But hopefully they will really kind of listen to you and hear you out. And ECI or early childhood intervention is free in most states. I want to say all states. I don't know. Don't quote me on that because I don't know if it's all states. And are always an option so that you also have a paper trail started fairly early. But that's an easy step. And you know, worst comes to worst, right? Like they come back and say, oh no, your kid is fine. And you know, and you come up with a different strategy, right? You go to Julie and go, okay, so my kid doesn't have, I mean, you know, I should flip back. Your kid is fine. All children are fine, right? Like all children are amazing and wonderful.
Sure, no, I understand.
And all that.
Of course.
But, you know, your kid is neurotypical, really is what they would come back and say. You go, okay, great. Cool. So let's figure out what the next set of strategies are to help with this relationship that I'm building with my child. And if that's not the case, if they are neurodivergent, then you have a path forward and you have the ability to go and seek out services and have that early intervention started so that you can do the exact same thing, right?
Well, yeah, and I want to hit that again too, because that was something you said at the beginning that sounds really important, that the earlier you can get into these behaviors so they don't get cemented is sort of what you said, the better, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you know, most of the time nobody's really going to diagnose particularly autism prior to 18 months. There's not a good tool to diagnose it prior to 18 months.
Right.
Most actually practitioners, that age has come down. It used to be 3 years old. That was the standard. Then it came down to 2. And now it's somewhere between 18 months and 2 years old. So if you have a concern, you know, and there's a wide range for milestone. I think we really get stuck on milestones, and sometimes kids are neurotypical and they just develop slower than their peers, and that's okay because there is this wide range of milestone acquisition in terms of age. But if something feels like it's not quite right, your kid gets tired really easily. Maybe something's going on. You know, that W-sit is neurotypical up to 3 years old, but you don't want to see it all the time. You want to see them sitting in other situations or other configurations. Other positions, because that indicates that core strength is there. And often that core strength correlates. There's no causal relationship, but it does sometimes correlate with a spectrum or other neurodivergent diagnosis. Words are often what kids get referred to ECI for most often, I think.
You mean when they're not verbal, they're late on being verbal.
Right. That being said, autism spectrum disorder has a communication component. That can mean hypo, under, you know, what you would expect for their age in terms of verbal communication. But you can actually have hyper verbal kids on the spectrum too. Wow. So, you know, it's very fluid, but if something feels off, absolutely go to your pediatrician and say, I think this needs to be, you know, addressed.
I don't know. That was a pretty good wrap up, Julie. Is there anything that you would add to that? That was pretty good.
I think she did really well. I just want to ask if we want to give our listeners the information they might need if they would like to get a hold of Emilie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, sure.
I mean,
yeah, please.
Yeah, so Emilie, if you just can.
My email is reallifeaba, that's with one L, so REALIFEABA @gmail. So my website is reallifeaba.com, which is REALIFEABA.com.
Great. And, you know, Julie, we should put it in the description. When we put the description up, we'll put Emilie's contact information there too. If you need counseling or have a question about something, we should share it there.
Yeah, because Emilie works, even though she is in Central Texas, you work by Zoom as well, right?
Yeah.
As we all do
pretty
now.
Fantastic. That has opened up all sorts of amazing horizons. And we're looking to get kind of hopefully a support group type situation going for parents of neurodivergent kids, because I think that often gets shortchanged. Parents feel very alone.
I could
when their kid gets diagnosed, and there's a lot of grief, complicated emotions that come along with diagnoses sometimes for parents. And so kind of supporting parents through that and hopefully giving them real concrete techniques to use to help their kid, to help further that relationship with their child. So.
All right. Well, congratulations. Julie, maybe we should figure out some prize for her that she has now successfully been our first ever podcast guest.
Yeah, we can send her a little trophy or something.
Yes, a trophy.
Right?
Okay, I'm going to get to work on that right now. So, Emilie, thank you so much. This was awesome. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.